Right.
Welcome to Lou Agosta Talks with
Uh,
Arnon Rolnick about empathy on March 9th, 2014. I'm in Chicago. You're in Ramat
Ramat Gan.
Gan. Got that right.
Yes.
And we're here live and in person.
And
So,
and
over to you, Arnon.
yes. And as I initiated this series of discussion, I should say that I was looking for professional people to discuss about empathy, and then I saw your book and your site, and I wanted to share with you some of the questions that interest me. And the first one would be, can we train empathy? Can we teach empathy? Can we help our therapists from one hand and our patients from the other hand to be more empathic? Could you elaborate on this?
Great question. Can we teach empathy, train to empathy? Powerful and important question. I have a thought. So this is not going to be the truth with a capital T, but here's something to catalyze the conversation. In a way, in many ways, a person, we human beings, can't not be empathic. We're naturally given to empathy. We, all other things being equal, we human beings will be empathic. And a significant part of education, socialization, making us be in such a way that we can live in a community together, that we can form, requires constraining, limiting, restricting, doing something with empathy so that it's no longer the naturally unfolding, developing, if you will, spontaneous response to another's humanity that we're given with. Empathy, in short, is our natural way of being with one another. It's our natural way of relating. And one has to intervene to constrain and script and limit the spontaneity of our, as I'm suggesting, spontaneously given inclination to be empathic. And some of that is called education.
So let me see if I understand. You suggest that empathy is something that we are born with, and somehow it could go wrong because of education or because of some of the processes that we impose on the children?
Well, I don't know if I want to say it's off the rails yet. I mean, there's a critique implied in my initial, admittedly optimistic statement about how, as you say, you got it right. I mean, we're born with this capability, this competence, and I'm thinking of the kinds of education that are indeed necessary, a certain amount of discipline, a certain amount of restraining one's natural desires, impulses, if you will, less social aspects that human beings are not necessarily born socialized, even if we're born empathic. That there is this matter of education, stay in your place, raise your hand, be called on in school, answer your questions, toilet training, how about that? Empathic toilet. I mean, we got to put the mess in a certain place in order to live together. Otherwise, community doesn't work. So, in that sense, there's going to be a tension. There's going to be conflict between our natural born cooperative tendencies and the need to live together in a way that accommodates one another. And so coming at it, so now fast forward, here we are, a couple of grown-up adult human beings, right? We're socialized, on a good day, we're quite able to live in community. We've restrained our aggressions, our antisocial inclinations, and the sexual and aggressive areas, and we get along pretty well with people, right? I mean, and from that point of view, the first thing to do to train, one way of training to empathy is to remove the resistances to empathy, to remove the inhibitions to empathy that we've had to layer on in order to function in community.
Lou, let me make it a little bit more difficult. You
I'm already tied up in knots.
You kind of present a Rogerian approach that we were born, with goodwill, and we need each other, and that human being is good from the beginning.
Yeah.
And you kind of connecting to empathy, and I'm not sure that this optimistic view is really what the research tells us.
Yeah. Well, I may be out on a limb here, okay? So let's work with it. And you're getting ready to saw the limb off. I think you're right. I mean, in the sense that what I said was Rogerian optimistic, especially optimistic, even if not. We acknowledge and honor Carl Rogers for his position on empathy. But what I'm seeing in the matter of training, right? In the matter of training, you can give somebody lessons and instructions, and you can sit them down and do various kinds of, and this has its uses. I'm not saying it's not useful to do mindedness training and to get in touch with your own feelings and so I can get in touch with the feelings of the other person that I'm relating to. And in a way, I gotta concede the point, that I think the criticism is implied. Human beings are aggressive and in a way greedy and grasping, and what else? Territorial. We are, if nothing else, territorial. Hey, this is my space. We don't always want to share. There's this negative side of human beings, which, hey, that's what we are and who we are. And along with being born naturally empathic, it turns out we are actually born naturally aggressive. Many of especially those who have a fair amount of testosterone, right? But just as the male gender is not mere testosterone, woman is not a mere womb. There's this whole process of socialization and communalization that gets layered on top of what we bring to the process. And so, in this sense, maybe it would be helpful to take a step back and say, what the heck do we mean by empathy, right? I mean, because I'm implicitly working with a definition, and it's not compassion, it's not a lot of other things. It's easy to say what it's not, but what the heck is it?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and then we can debate that point too. And then we can train to that, right? I mean, so, I was doing my homework, and I have a couple of thoughts about that also.
Great, and that could be the second chapter in our discussion. We began with this practical questions, but you kind of tell me, Arnon, before we deal with the practical things, let's go back and make some definition.
Right, and so I mean, so the definition. So I have. Here's the definition I propose, and then we can add and subtract and transform. I mean, there are 4 aspects to a unified, multidimensional process of empathy. There's empathic receptivity. So one individual is open to the experience of the other person. And that aspect of empathy is captured by things like Kohut's vicarious experience, vicarious introspection. Be open to, I mean, and that layers onto empathic receptivity is arguably enabled by the work in neurophenomenology on mirror neurons and some kind of a network, whether it's endocrinological or actually involves mirror neurons, that enable human beings and indeed all higher mammals to resonate together. So on top, so you get that is input. That sort, I would call it physiological. I mean, there's a strong component of sensation and experience, including emotions, emotional contagion. If you stop here, you get emotional contagion. You don't get full a grown-up adult empathic relatedness. You get a kind of beginning form, and that serves as input to empathic understanding. Understanding, key term, understanding of possibility. Who is the person, the other individual, as a possibility? Yes, they're in my face with some confront. They want the parking space. Here in Chicago, people actually fight about parking spaces. I mean, you have to call, people call the police. It's out of control here. You know, that's a small example of territoriality that goes off the rails, right? I mean, it's not funny, and it's funny, but in many ways it's not, because it results in actual people getting hurt. Anyway, who am I not as a possible parking space, but as a parent, as a teacher, as a mentor, as a student, as a neighbor, right? I mean, as someone who builds community, as someone who has a contribution in whatever area, you know, building a house, building an empathic relationship, building you know, I mean, the list is long, right? And that itself maps to those thinkers who emphasize empathy as a kind of cognitive. There's a cognitive dimension, although not merely that. There's actually an existential dimension as well, and that's where you get things like we mentioned Carl Rogers earlier, and one of his definitions of empathy as unconditional positive regard, validation of the other person as possibility. That, I mean, they're suffering, they've got symptoms, they've got whatever they've got whatever they're struggling with, they've got struggle. Human beings, to be human is to struggle with some stuff, right? I mean, you know, one's daily bread, if you will, or one's career and one's relationships and one's things that one is up to. And so we get the emotional, empathic receptivity, empathic understanding, and that itself then feeds into, both of these feeds into something like an empathic interpretation, where one is able to put oneself into the other person's shoes. That's the, if you will, the stereotype and the cliche. That gathers the if you will, the definitions of empathic relatedness that you find in cognitive role-taking. And there are a number of thinkers who emphasize, and in some ways I want to say those thinkers who emphasize simulation processes. A neurophenomenologist, Gordon, trying to think of his first name. Okay, well, he's out there. And the anthologies that talk about simulating the experiences of other people, and doing so somewhat consciously and intentionally, even though arguably there are also simulation processes going on underneath the covers. And finally then, all of these seeds, so different interpretations from different points of view. I put myself in your position, and I put myself in your position with your character and qualities and struggles and efforts. And that's an issue, because I know you, but maybe I don't know you, you know, as well as I in some ways know myself or other members of my family. I know whatever I know. And so one has to quarantine or whatever the term is, segregate one's own characters and characteristics and qualities and try to adapt and adopt those of the other person. And then all three of these processes, receptivity, understanding, and interpretation, feed into a responsiveness that finally I get around and I say, gee, it sounds like the situation you were in, you decided to speak truth to power, or what, make something up here, and power didn't appreciate it and had something to say back, and all of a sudden you found yourself in this conflict, and it went well or it didn't go well, and then you get to, the process gets reiterated. You get to say, well, did I get it or didn't I get it, or you're kind of on the right track, and so at the back end there's an optimal responsiveness, which feeds into the beginning, because paradoxically empathy begins with the form of language called listening.
Right. So I think you kind of
pause to listen.
Say it again.
I pause in order to listen.
Yes. Yes. So in fact, you can describe various components of empathy, which all goes together to the ability to respond to the other in a certain way. Is that correct?
The short answer is, yeah, you got it. I mean, your empathy is good, and you were listening, if I may say so, and so, yeah, I mean, we have agreement, right? I mean, and there's actually a lot more to be said. Maybe it would be useful for me to take a moment to bring it back to the first question that you asked, is how do we train to empathy, right? Yes. Because having now admittedly a fairly elaborate and complex description and definition of the process, one can train to each of these different aspects. Mm-hmm. You see the value of having a definition, because you can then say, well, I began somewhat paradoxically by saying the way you train to empathy is you do work on removing the resistance and inhibitions to empathy, and then empathy shows up. You can't not be, you can't stop it. Good news. There's good news here. Empathy happens, and one has to go out of one's way to prevent it from happening, which largely consists of most of political engagement in, North America and parts of the European Union, including Israel, with which you can relate. I gotta believe, and so I'm not sure we can really do the politics of empathy today. It's a personal phenomenon, but it gives us it gives us a roadmap for training to empathy. Train for empathic receptivity. How do we enhance people's receptivity to the other? Train for understanding of people as possibilities. Train, and then you get. You struggle with that for a while, you get good at it, you make some mistakes, you take it up another level, this matter of interpretation. Almost everything a person says is some kind of an interpretation. And then the actual responsiveness, where I either get it right or I get to keep trying.
Okay, so now I try to combine the two parts of our discussions. There is the assumption or the hope that we are born with empathy, and there's only obstacles, or what would be the other word for something prevents us from being
inhibitions, resistances, obstacles, for sure. Which some of which we create ourselves, some of which we work together. I mean, the world is not always empathic. I mean, natural disasters, right? I mean.
So then maybe we can take each of the components that you mentioned, and we might wonder where is the obstacles there? Where is the obstacle in the cognitive empathy? Where is the obstacle maybe in this emotional empathy? And where is the obstacle in expressing it to the other?
Yes. Well, the obstacle, I mean, here's the short answer. The obstacle is usually, so take the finger, right, which generally points somewhere to somebody, and point it at myself, point it at oneself, and then That's the main obstacle. The main work consists in removing one's own. So, everybody on the chat or whatever it is we're on the Hangout gets to take your finger and point it at yourself, and I get to get to work on myself. You see, and then I'm more available to the other. Now, this is one of those things that's deceptively easy to say and very hard. It's hard to implement. There's a lot of work there, right? And so, we got to get to work, right? It's confession. It's a different model. I did it. It's what I struggle with,
Do you think we can take what we just spoke and try to see about our empathy in this specific discussion? What, for example, can we do in order to be even more empathetic?
Yeah.
Or can we use ourselves as a role model?
Yeah.
The audience doesn't know, but we know each other only, I don't know, 1 hour of talk earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so yeah, I get the proposal is to be empathic and demonstrate the empathy, right?
Right.
And so yeah, I mean, I take that on. I mean, I take that on. I've been doing way too much talking to be empathic. You see the problem, but I'm going to talk a little bit more and then dial it down and pass. Here's my ultimate inauthenticity. I mean, the way to, I'm glad you said not exactly be more empathic, but implied expand empathy. It's not like it's a quantity, but the goal is to expand it. So my ultimate inauthenticity around empathy, I'm very interested in the subject. It engages me, intellectually, cognitively. I'm engaged by it. Here's my ultimate inauthenticity. I mean, I didn't get enough empathy, so I went out, one may say, and wrote a book on it, right? And then I went around and told people, hi, my name is Lou Agosta. I'm the author of a book on empathy. And they weren't always appreciative of that. That sounded very arrogant. And that was my lack of empathy, you see. That was my own. It wasn't. I mean, my intention may have been good or somewhat self-aggrandizing, and so I ought rather. I mean, hindsight is 20/20. I ought rather to have said, "I acknowledge your empathy in a given instance." So I do, by the way.
But let me use this opportunity to ask you to say a few words about your book.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's empathy. You see the obstacles to empathy. I'm so too busy talking about myself, you see, to be empathic.
That's part of our plan.
It's funny, though. I mean, do you see the humor of it? I mean, we can, I mean, and notice that I mean, that's not all bad. I mean, I think you get to things like humor belongs with empathy, doesn't it? I mean, this is not we'll plug the book later, okay? I mean, it's out there. And there'll be plenty more where that came from. And this is all goodness, right? You talk to an author and he loves to plug the book. Thank you. And we'll do, but I think we should devote a whole series to plugging the book. But okay, so this is off the rails, right? Here's the thing, but you got to get what I'm saying. I mean, I think you do. But I'm going to shut up and invite you. I think confess is not exactly the right word, but I happen to know because we've talked, right, that you've got an empathy project there in Ramat Gan. Mm-hmm. And among other things, it's like, how do we train to empathy? You've got a staff of 12 people or, whatever, 15 people, and you're a contribution to the community in the matter of what people are struggling with, in some cases suffering with, what the struggle and effort that they have regarding the challenges, the personal challenges that they're facing. And the list is long, right? The list is long, everything from relatedness to finances to can't get enough time, and the boss at work is on my case, and you know, so you've definitely got some skin in the game. I'd like to hear. So the guy being interviewed turns the tables on the interviewer. Perfect.
Okay.
What's your take on that? I mean, because that's going to be the empathic connection there.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving me the microphone for a few minutes, but I would say it very shortly. You know, I'm a clinical psychologist, and one of the problems that I had all these years that I was asked to say, what type of psychologist I am? I'm a cognitive psychologist, I am a behavioral psychologist, I am psychoanalyst, I am, you know, this tagging and when I established this clinic here, I decided that the clinic will really cover a full range of possibilities of therapists. Now, the question, if I want to make sure that they will have this continuing education and people in my clinic will be a better therapist, I felt that if I want to teach them something, the classical teaching would be teach them Winnicott, teach them Aaron Beck, which I felt is not the most important thing. And I thought that the most important aspect of being a therapist is to being empathic.
Yeah.
And this is why I entered into this project. The first year, we call it to be a fly on the wall of the therapy room. Sorry for that noise. That's one of the obstacles for...
That's perfect, actually. It's a perfect moment. A fly on the wall and the bell goes off. It's the right answer. When you hear the bell, it means it's the right answer.
So we took or we bought movies or videos of quite known therapists in the United States and watched how they are doing their session.
Yeah.
And we tried to analyze what is the interaction between the patient and the therapist, and which was very interesting, but I felt that we need to explore a little bit more this concept of empathy. And I also want to put on the table another issue, another term, which is synchronization.
Yeah.
Which I will be happy if we will discuss it in our next meetings.
Yeah.
So this is why I approached you, because I read what you do, and I learned about the book. Yeah. And maybe that could be a good point to close for this first discussion.
It could. It is a good point. Except that I want to give you back what I got, right? You know, I'm not saying it's an optimal response, but it's definitely a response.
Please do.
And to try to demonstrate the empathic, I mean, and granted, we're talking too much, both of us, right? But, you know, and the movie, the video is probably too long to be convenient, but it's a work in progress, and this is what you get. I mean, let me give you back what I got here, Arnon, because the first thing you said is like, here I am, here's my commitment, psychology, clinical psychology, and now I get to explain who I am, right? Mm-hmm. And the expected answers are a bunch of categories, right? I mean, is it cognitive behavioral, rational emotive, you know, self-psychology, Rogerian psychology? The list is long, and all the list, there's categories on the list. So maybe, possibility, what you're saying, among other things, is don't let the categories get in the way.
Right.
You know, maybe this is empathy 101. When all is said and done, you know, when you get all of the medications, all of the psychodynamic modalities, psychoanalysis, CBT, XYZ, don't forget that you're in the presence of another human being. And you know, that's a start. I mean, that's a start, and by the way, the journey and the ending. And then you went on to say, right, you've got this clinic, and you said, well, let's try I mean, tactics and techniques and modalities have their uses. Somebody comes in, they're suffering from whatever they're suffering from, and it may be, you know, if one doesn't work, I mean, a person may usefully be pragmatic. There's nothing succeeds like success. Your commitment is to make a difference. And at some level, I mean, Aaron Beck started out as a psychoanalyst. You know, interrupt the pathogenic thought. Okay, well, what kind of a conversation are you having with yourself? Well, okay, interrupt that. Well, that makes a difference. So that go there. And the idea of being a fly on the wall and looking at what people actually do when they have this conversation is a great idea. Yeah. And because we're responding, people are responding. That's the empathic moment. You may not be the only one who thought of doing that, but it definitely needs doing. So that's what and then you mentioned the matter of synchronization, which we're going to look at. Yeah, definitely. So that's future prospects here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I felt that you kind of reflect very well my thought and you also gave me some gleaming eye. You said that's kind of you like the idea, so it's even more than empathy. Would you agree that the gleaming eye, this Kohotian concept?
Yeah. Well, the gleam in the parent's eye. You're referring to, for those of the audience who may not have read the 600 pages of Kohut. The gleam in the parent's eye makes a big difference in creating the self of the child, especially. Attaboy, my boy, right? I mean, and it's admiration, and as you say, there is admiration. I mean, and there's recognition would be a more neutral word, and acknowledgement. I think that would be the neutral word. Admiration and agreement is too agreeable, you know. I mean, nothing wrong with agreement; it happens. But sometimes, yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I mean, and that is an aspect of empathy. I think that is not reducible to empathy, but is in the same field of distinctions. I mean, the thought that there was a thought there that you know, I was listening. Here's a thought. Yeah, I tried. So you think I got there, and you know, you didn't really test me too severely, but that's okay. You know, well, some other time. Here's the thing. Here's what has helped me. You know, a lot of times I struggle with the following: to listen to what the other person is saying, as opposed to listening to my opinion of what the other person is saying, right? If I can because I always have an opinion, right? I mean, who doesn't have an opinion? But that's not what they're saying. That's the agreement-disagreement dimension. And so, you know, I'm getting practice. To end on the matter of training to empathy, where we began, one can do an exercise in that. One can get the staff together and say, okay, now here's the difference. What the person said versus what my opinion of what the person said. Now apply that to yourself. And you can do it, have them say something, you know, then have a conversation and say, did you get it? Did you not get it? And you'd pair off, guess what? Divide up in twos or not, as a group, and write down what you think they said. And so there are, in addition to not being able to stop empathy, this is a short exercise, and maybe we should delete the middle 40 minutes of our talk and just edit the two together. So, you know, let me just take it up a level and say this has been you know, very engaging, and the challenges of having a conversation on video are not to be underestimated, because we're not actually alone. You know, there's potentially a whole audience here, and we're empathic with them too, and they with us, or whatever they are. So we're doing this to expand empathy in the world.
Yeah.
Stand by for update.
And let's say to the world, to the world, thank you for hearing us. And shall we stop and let's see how it worked?
I'm going to hit the stop button.